Mike Owens here, joined today by Dan Hardy, the head of PFL Europe and a UK MMA legend. Dan, always a pleasure, my man. How are things for you today?
Always a pleasure talking to you, my friend. It's been a while since the last time we spoke, hasn't it?
The last time we spoke, we were both on Texas soil down in Austin for Veronica's last fight. You were there for Veronica's last fight. I was there to cover the cards. I thought we'd start there because obviously Veronica won that fight and then has won her last one a couple of weeks ago in St. Louis. So your reaction to your new wife's film?
Man, just proud, just really proud of her. The work that she's put in, the progress that she's made. She impresses me every single training camp, and we've only done three training camps, three fights together, but each one has been a massive improvement on the last.
Mm.
We trained this morning. She's still working on things that she wasn't happy with from the last fight. She's constantly talking about, where we're going, who's next, and when's next, and so yeah, we're just in a good place at the moment. We've found our groove, and I think it's showing in her performances.
I checked Tapology before we jumped on. She's ranked as the number 21st strawweight in the world. So what would you like to see for her next? Is there a opponent that you've got your eye on that you think would be a nice style matchup for her?
Not particularly, like the UFC matchmakers, they do a tremendous job. Mick Maynard has a good idea of the picture in the division, and he knows who's best to match. For the next opponent. I think the opponents that she's had have been, difficult in different ways. She's had an Ultimate Fighter winner, tall, awkward, very, very game and willing to fight, change submissions together well. Then she had someone that was familiar from an old sparring days, but a big, strong, powerful athlete that was, you don't really want to tangle up with her too much. And then in JJ Aldrich, a veteran, someone that's got loads of experience and has got a lot of common opponents with people in the top 15. So I think I just leave it to the experts and let them offer who's next, and we'll be ready when the time comes.
Well, I suppose talking about matchmaking and kind of operational work, let's turn the conversation to your career. We're obviously got this card coming up in Newcastle next Saturday. This is obviously your second season as part of the PFL brand and in your role as head of Europe. So how has the role with PFL, specifically with Europe, lived up to your expectations?
It's good. I mean, it's busy. The problem is, I wish we had more shows. I wish we had more events because, as you know as well as I do, the amount of fighters in Europe that are desperate to be competing that are just not able to get matchups.
Mm.
I could easily do twice, three times as many shows as we're doing in Europe right now, and have every single card stacked from top to bottom. You look at this card coming up June 8th in Newcastle. There's not a single fight on that card that I'm not really looking forward to. And there are so many more of the fighters that are constantly in my inbox, messaging me, DMing me, get me a fight, get me a matchup. Like I wish I could accommodate all of these fighters because there's some real talent out there that just are not getting the activity that they need. So that's my main thing right now is to keep it growing, make it sustainable, keep it growing, and then sign as many fighters as I can.
Well, talking about the main event, obviously Savannah Marshall making her MMA debut. What was your first reaction when you heard Savannah was going to make the move over to MMA, and what are you expecting from her on June 8th in her first fight?
My first thought is if she can knock people out with the big gloves on, imagine what she's going to do with 4 ounces.
Mm.
Like she's a big, powerful athlete. She's got great boxing skills. Like you go back to the way that she fights as well, and particularly obviously now they're going to be on a trajectory to fight again, Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall. That when they fought as pros, like Savannah's style of fighting,
Mm.
in my opinion, really suits MMA. Like my favorite boxer is Julio Cesar Chavez, and that's because of the way that he used to box. He'd
Mm.
get in your face, he'd make it uncomfortable, he'd keep pressure on. And when the opportunity arose to throw power punches, he would make you pay. And that's what Savannah Marshall does. She pressures people until they start to open up and break, and then she knocks them out. Like if she's able to apply some takedown defense, if she's able to add into her game some submission defense and some ability to scramble safely, she's going to be a problem for anybody in the cage. There's no doubt about it. And then you put her in a gym with Tom Aspinall and Andy Aspinall,
Mm.
Tom's dad. She's doing a lot of work with those guys that I expect to, a very, very quick uptake on her grappling skills. I'm expecting a good performance from her. But as with all of the fights on my events, there's no easy matchups. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I've found an opponent that is going to push her,
Mm.
and will make Savanna nervous, which is I think something that is you know maybe a different experience to a pro boxing debut. When often you tend to get a more comfortable opponent, so you can kind of feel your way around the pro ring. It's not that. It's not the case here. Like, she's fighting a kickboxing world champion, a BJJ purple belt, someone that's got three pro fights already. I wanted to make this a good competitive fight for Savanna to make sure we get the best out of her as well. And I think that we've got that with Morella Vargas.
I have to ask this as well because obviously we've seen Clarissa make the move over to MMA. Now we're seeing Savannah make her professional debut. Two girls in top five women's pound for pound list in boxing, if not top 10 at the very least. What does it say about the state of women's boxing that these world champions and these high level fighters in the women's game are making the move over to MMA?
Honestly, I feel for them because it shows that options run out very quickly.
Mm,
Like what Savannah's had, 16 pro fights. Like, she shouldn't be running out of opponents at this stage. And Clarissa's the same. Like, of course there are fights out there that could take place, but there's not going to be there isn't another opponent out there for either of them like a rematch.
mm,
And it seems to me like the only way that Savannah's going to get that rematch out of Clarissa is if she chases her into the smart cage.
mm,
And I'll be honest, like, I think Clarissa has done well to adapt her skills, but I don't think she's looked as sharp as she'd anticipated. And I think if I'm Savannah looking at Clarissa in MMA gloves, I'm thinking, you know what, I could be better than her at mixed martial arts in a short period of time. And the difference between the two, like, Clarissa knows that she's a boxer in mixed martial arts. Savannah's really taken to the grappling.
mm.
Like, call me crazy, but in 12 months, it wouldn't surprise me if Savannah's able to choke Clarissa out. And that would be a real turn up for the books. That would really ignite that rivalry again.
Yeah. It's really interesting as well with seeing these high profile boxers make the move over to MMA. We've obviously seen Kayla take the move away from PFL and make a UFC debut. Francis Ngannou is obviously still doing his thing in boxing, but obviously is associated with the PFL brand, but still hasn't stepped into the smart cage. In your opinion, Dan, at this moment in time, who would you say is the face of the PFL brand?
Man, that's a good question. Who is I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I would be tempted to say Dakota Ditcheva right now.
Mm,
Like, she stepped onto the global roster. She looked fantastic. You've also got to say that Impa Kasangane is one of the most recognizable and well-known faces, partly because of how comfortable he's looked moving up a weight class and decimating people that are a lot bigger than him. Um, I think we have a lot of young stars, young talent in the PFL that over the next couple of years he's really going to start to emerge. With Olivier Mercier retiring, it's opened up the lightweight division. I think people are realizing how good Clay Collard is.
mm,
Um, he's fighting Mads Burnell next. That's an incredible matchup. And then the featherweight division as well. We saw a real shake-up last year with Loughnane not getting to the finals and Bubba Jenkins not getting to the finals, Chris Wade. Like, they were all eclipsed by two young prospects coming through. So, Braga and Jesus Pinedo are two other fighters that we've got to watch. We've got to keep an eye on because we might be looking at the best featherweights on the planet there, and certainly, in the conversation in the next year or two.
Last time I spoke with Shane Burgos a couple of weeks ago, and he told me he's currently waiting for the Super Fight series to kick off the pay-per-view. If you had to give me some matchups that you think we could potentially see on the pay-per-view side of the PFL, the Super Fight series, what would be your early predictions for something like that?
Man, that again is another good question. That's a conversation I would have to have with the team. It's
Mm,
difficult because obviously fighters are spread across two different organizations now. We've integrated a lot of Bellator fighters into the PFL global season. So
mm,
we've got fighters that are going to be competing for $1 million and in the playoffs very soon. So a lot of fighters are distracted with that right now. I think
mm,
there are some outliers, of course. Derek Brunson's on the roster. We could be potentially seeing him competing on one of those pay-per-view cards. Um, I don't know what exactly is happening with Cyborg or Larissa Pacheco, but that's a fight, in my
mm.
opinion, as a fan, that should happen. Man, it's all up in the air right now. Shane Burgos is an interesting one because it doesn't really matter who you match him up with. It, you always know you're going to get an absolute banger of a
Yeah.
fight. And even if you've got Anthony Pettis potentially fighting Cedric Doumbé on that card, like you could quite easily throw Shane Burgos in against either of those guys, and that's a really interesting one as well. So lots of possibilities. My focus right now, of course, we've got the PFL Europe show coming up, and then I'm heading straight out to do the first of the regular season events at the Mohegan Sun. So like I feel like the year's already underway and it's moving very, very quickly.
You mentioned Cyborg and Larissa there, and it brings me on to my next point. And I don't want to put you on the spot with this one, but it feels like one of the key stories at the moment associated with the PFL brand is the news we heard last week about Gegard Mousasi and obviously the subsequent release from a promotion. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts. And again, I'm conscious I might be putting you on the spot with this one, but just your thoughts on that whole situation and how it's all unraveled.
I don't know many details about it, to be honest. I mean, from a
Mm,
fan's perspective, I've always held Mousasi in very, very high regard. We were fighting around the same time for a long period, so he was always on cards that at the same time as I was in training camp,
mm,
and I always really enjoyed watching him fight. And
mm,
I think honestly, the fact that he's still wanting to be active and compete, we're lucky to have him.
mm,
I don't know the details of his deal with Bellator when the two organizations came together.
mm,
There were a lot of things up in the air, and I think a few things they were either, they just didn't get ironed out in time. And I hope it gets resolved. I'm a big fan of Gegard. I hope that he gets some activity and we get to see some more fights,
yeah.
regardless of what banner that's underneath. He's a legend of the game, Gegard, and I was hoping to get to call one of his fights, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Couple more from me, Dan, and as always, I appreciate your time. UFC 304. We've obviously got the return to the UK in Manchester, 3 a.m. start time. I've already had some of the fighters on the show. I spoke with Arnold last week. I spoke with Rowe, who's trying to get on it yesterday. Just your reaction to that card first and foremost, but also specifically the start time.
The start time. Well, I mean, the card's great. The card is it's going to be a real showcase of the UK talent that the UFC have got on the roster right now. It's unfortunate about the start time. It really is. Like I don't expect that the UFC fans are going to let the fighters down and the atmosphere is going to
Mm,
be dead in there, but I do think it's going to certainly be a slog to get through to the main event at that kind of time. I was there working backstage when Bisping and Henderson rematched in
mm,
Manchester. It was the same situation. Everyone was exhausted. You get sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, everyone's like flagging, and
mm,
it's just I don't know. No matter how much you adapt your sleep schedule, even if you're a fighter and you're trying to train so you're alert and awake at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, like your circadian cycle is still thrown out of a rhythm. Um, I don't know. I'm disappointed for the fans and for the fighters, to be honest, because I
mm,
think it's going to make the event less special than what it could be. I still think it's going to be great, but it won't be quite as iconic as some of the other events that we've had, like Bisping Anderson Silver at the O2, for
yeah.
example. Like this card could eclipse that, and I
Yeah.
think that the start time may be one of the biggest detractors of it.
Well, talking about special cards, my last show I attended on the MMA side was 300 over in Las Vegas, and that obviously had a crazy moment with Max Holloway's last second KO, and a lot of people at the moment are saying, is it the greatest knockout in MMA history? So my question to you, Dan, for this final question is, in your opinion, what makes a great or a classic knockout? Because there's a lot of factors that go into it. So I'm wondering from your perspective off the top of your head, what makes a knockout that stands the test of time?
Um, I think a big part of it is the circumstance in which the knockout happened. You
Mm,
can have some fantastic knockouts that happen on a regional show where the person that win by knockout managed to get 15 of his friends to come and watch. And yes, there was pressure because, it's early in their career, etc., etc. But when you're Masvidal and you're walking out against Ben Askren and you know that this can go one or two ways and you're going to roll the dice on a flying knee, or when you're Conor McGregor and you're walking out against Jose Aldo and you've got a plan in your mind that you think is going to happen, you've got to roll the dice and make that happen. Like I enjoy American football, but I love watching the Super Bowl because the pressure in the Super Bowl is different to every one of
mm,
those league games. And it's the same thing with the likes of Max Holloway in that fight, or Masvidal or McGregor. They're the two that really stand out to me. Um, the pressure is so great. So for them to not only do something spectacular, but to do it in that situation is really special. And you know, of course, the McGregor and the Masvidal ones, the reason why I like them is because they were set up, they were finely tuned for the opponent that they were due to face. But then you look at the Max Holloway one and the fact that it was an absolute scrap until that moment. I don't know. It sets it aside again. It makes it look like it was earned a lot more, if that makes sense, than you know, the Masvidal coming out and putting Ben Askren to sleep in a few seconds. It was a special moment, special knockout,
Yeah.
and you just kind of you can't help but root for Max Holloway anyway. So to see him have that kind of success, it was special.
I love it. I love it. Well, Dan, always a pleasure catching up, mate. Really good to chat with you today. Great to see what you guys and the rest of the team at PFL Europe are doing with bringing these shows to the UK specifically, but also the rest of Europe. So best of luck with the show next week, and talk soon, my friend.
Thank you, mate. Good talking to you again. I'll speak to you soon.